All right. Hey there, and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about how to deal with intrusive thoughts, specifically with unwanted violent thoughts towards family members or loved ones. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Cotty, and I'm the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And, for those of you who are here, dealing with intrusive thoughts or know someone who does, we really would appreciate your support on our channel by liking and subscribing, as well as commenting and even sharing with family and friends so we can get this to, as many people out there that need it as possible. And so, but on this series, I wanted to start off this intrusive thought series really with intrusive violent thoughts, because I think these are, it's not that they're any more prevalent than any other ones, but I mean, they're very common, and a lot of people deal with these thoughts and they cause them a lot of shame and guilt and, a lot of self-turmoil. And this is going to be a common theme in all of these. But, this is really common for, like parents to have towards their children or spouses to have towards their spouses, and even children towards parents, and I've kind of seen the whole dynamic, with how as many people as I worked with, I've seen it's kind of gone to every aspect you can imagine. So specifically, I want to share a case study today about a person I worked with once who was a mother, and she was having these intrusive thoughts about her child, right? Her young, like kind of infant child. And again, this applies to really anyone, right? But I mean, the obvious, right? And this is the one thing we need to remember. OCD will always attack the thing that's the most important to you, right? And one of the ways that we identify this as an OCD or an anxiety issue is that these thoughts were completely ego dystonic, meaning that this was the last thing that this person would ever have done, right? And for most of you, you probably feel exactly like that. That these thoughts are just not a reflection of what you really want. And so the fact that you're having them is what makes them so disturbing, right? And that's what causes this overreaction to them. And then paradoxically, what causes you to do certain compulsions, right? Which could be physical or mental, kind of like we talked about in the last episode. And if you haven't listened to that yet or gone through that, please make sure you go through that, because again, these are going to kind of build on order here, or in order. So, but anyways, when I was working with this person, the first meeting I remember is just like, in so many cases, and I can just like vividly remember this, when I first meet with the person that are dealing with these thoughts, oftentimes it's been such a long time that they've suffered in silence that like the moment they finally get to even say, and oftentimes they're so embarrassed and humiliated to even say what's on their mind with intrusive thoughts, that the moment it's just like this huge gauge of pressure is just taken off their back, right? And once I explained that intrusive thoughts are actually very common, right, and a very, very common form of OCD and anxiety, I mean, just the idea of not being alone is such a relief for people. And so if this is something you struggle with, I think that's one of the things that I really want to stress is that, oh my gosh, these are so common, right? And if this is something you're dealing with, like, you're not alone, right? And over at Restored Minds, like, there are tools to help you, right? This is not like a life sentence that you're stuck with, right? You can overcome this. And it's really about understanding what we're really dealing with and giving you and equipping you with the right tools so that you know what to do each and every time these thoughts and feelings pop up. So, but anyways, the person was talking about how they had these intrusive, harmful thoughts towards their child. And the first step was really, again, explaining that these are normal, right? Explaining the OCD cycle, explaining the 4 components like we talked about in the first episode in this series. And then, and really explaining the idea of these thoughts being ego dystonic, right? And the fact that they're not a reflection of your true desire, they're just a thought. And the reason they cause you so much distress is because it's not something that you really want, right? So then, the next step to this process really comes back down to this idea of separating yourself from your thoughts, right? And realizing that you are not your thoughts, you're the observer of the thoughts, right? And that's what we're talking about with this talk about this idea of cognitive diffusion, right? And so that's really the next step of the process that we went through, in really understanding these senses of self and even understanding this voice in the mind and how it operates, and really practicing being the observer of that. One of the best tools to really practice that and to really get that diffusion for people is meditation, by the way. So if you deal with intrusive thoughts, like, and one of the things that I do encourage is meditation, but I don't encourage meditation to try to get rid of thought. Okay, that can be that's where it starts to get backwards. What we're doing in meditation is really practicing our senses, or really identifying our senses of self, and really practicing diffusing from thought, right? Not eliminating thought. Okay, so just quick little caveat there. So that's kind of the next step of the process. And then the final parts of the process is really understanding the belief structures that the person has that is driving this, right? So meaning, what are the stories the person tells themselves about having these thoughts, and what does that mean about them? Because in many cases, that's what the person's actually reacting to. Oftentimes, what I love doing with people with intrusive thoughts is literally just presenting a different intrusive thought to them that's not their theme, so to speak, and watching them not react to it. You know, most people will say, who struggle with OCD and anxiety, well, I just wish I had that theme because it would be so easy for me, right? I just wish I had this other theme, right? So, whether it's a person with harm OCD wondering or wishing they would have contamination OCD, or someone with hit and run OCD was, dealing with scrupulosity, like whatever it is, they just want this other theme, right? Because what they're really saying is that I don't have any stories about that, right? Like, that's just a thought to me. And the reality is the other one that you're having right now is just a thought. But what you're reacting to is all the stories that you have about the thought. And that's why some of the most powerful work that we take people through over in, our Taking Back Control bootcamp is the idea of breaking and rebuilding beliefs, right? Because when you're trying to change thoughts and you're trying to get rid of thoughts, that has a backwards effect, right? Like if I told you, don't think about a white bear for the next 5 minutes, you're going to have the image of a white bear pop up. In fact, you probably did. It's just as I was talking right there, right? Now, why is that? Well, because when you try not to think about something, you indirectly create that image. Don't think about a white bear. Well, you're already creating the image of a white bear, right? And this is the trap people get caught in with intrusive thoughts. It's like, don't think about X. Well, it's already coming up. And because when you have the story of, oh, well, a good mother doesn't have intrusive thoughts. So if you have that story underneath it, right, or that belief structure, or I'm not allowed to have these thoughts, or, whatever it is, right? Do you understand how much that's going to fuel that certain thought, right? Like, do you see how that works? Like, the beliefs that we have underneath our thoughts and the stories we tell ourselves that are often even subconscious are what really generate our overreaction. And that's why when we learn to change our stories about the thoughts in many ways, that actually is what produces such long-term results. A lot of times what happens with people is if we just do ERP with a specific thought and we never really work on any kind of belief structure or anything like that, the OCD comes up with another thought, and then someone will just bounce around from theme to theme to theme to theme to theme. And that's not the appropriate way to do it, in my opinion, because then you're just going to always be doing, you're kind of like picking a weed off at the very top, right? This really is about addressing it from the lowest level possible, right? So with this particular person, yeah, obviously it was challenging and rebuilding belief structures around thought, but then it was about, really removing all the behaviors that the person was doing that was reinforcing this loop. And this included, some of the behaviors that are really common with intrusive, harmful thoughts, especially towards family members, were things like avoiding sharp objects, right? So what you need to understand, though, is like, let's just use that one safety behavior as an example. If I have a thought of like, what if I took a knife and hurt my spouse, my wife? Let's just use my wife as an example in this, okay? Sorry, babe, if you're, hearing this. But, if I had an intrusive thought when I was at home of like, what if I took this knife and I hurt my wife, right? That thought might be really scary, right? Because it's not something that I want to do. But the thing is, if I avoid a knife behaviorally, right? If I was like cutting dishes, not dishes, but if I was cutting like vegetables or something, and I avoided the knife, well, I'm teaching my brain through my behavior that thought is really serious. I need to make sure that I don't touch that knife. Where if I behaviorally defied the thought, right, and said, no, you know what, I'm going to dismiss that, and I'm going to take the knife and cut the vegetables anyway. Even while the thought was there, See, that is what true exposure is. I'm exposing myself to the thought, and I'm preventing myself from responding in a compulsive way or using a safety behavior. And that right there is what actually breaks the loop, because I'm proving to my brain through my behavior that that's not really dangerous. You see how that works? And this is what we did, is what we really worked on this idea of like, okay, what are the behaviors you do physically and mentally? What is everything you avoid? What are the, do you ruminate? Do you try to analyze? Do you thought block? Do you thought replace, right? Do you get reassurance, right? I mean, these are all the things that people do. And the more and more you do any behaviors, the more that allows that wheel to spin, right? And so, but really, the person that I'm talking about in this example had tremendous success once we understood these kind of components here, right? Once again, we understood this idea of diffusing from our thoughts, right? Using meditation for that. Once we really started looking at the belief structures, and once we really went in and really got rid of all the compulsions and all the safety behaviors that the person was doing, that's what allowed that wheel to break and completely revalue the experience. The reason that one intrusive thought is different than the other is not the thought itself, and that's why we're not trying to get rid of thoughts, because you can have intrusive thoughts about something and have no reaction to them, right? What makes your reaction is your belief in your story about the thought, which is why challenging and changing your story, and as well as not engaging in any behaviors that reinforce it, is how we really break the loop. And once you break the loop, you get out of the lens, which is what it allows you to revalue the entire experience of that initial thought. So hopefully that makes sense. I know there's a lot to unpack there. And for those of you that are looking to go deeper on this journey, we have some free training over for you at restoredminds.com, as well as our Taking Back Control Bootcamp, where we go deep into again, not only identifying all your behaviors, but what you need to do specifically to remove them, and along with the idea of breaking and rebuilding beliefs, because that is the most powerful work you can do with this stuff right here, because that's the long-term recovery stuff that most people miss. So thank you for taking the time to hang out today. I hope this was helpful if you struggle with intrusive, harmful thoughts, and if you need to re-listen to that, right? Because there's a lot of things that I jammed in there to really make sure that you had the structure of what you need to do. If this was something that you struggle with intrusive, harmful thoughts towards loved ones. So thank you for hanging out today. Again, check out our resources over at restoredminds.com, and give us some support by liking and subscribing. And I will see you guys next week. All right, take care. Thank you so much for watching that video. And so if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety, I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training for you over at Restored Minds, where you can start learning how to use our AAA response to really break out of that loop and ultimately take back control of your life. And all you need to do to access is just click the little link below, and you'll be taken to a page where you can register today. Thank you so much.